Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Stitch Sessions. This week we're diving back into our Year of the Bride series for 2020. It is April, so for April's Bride, I'm going to show you how to create this beautiful vintage style bridal clutch, or you can simply make it as an evening bag. We use the puff stitches here and we'll be working in the round. I've also added some embellishments here with an old necklace I had lying around that I've interwoven into the bag to make it look like it has a beautiful beading texture to it. There's also a zipper that will be hand sewing onto it, and you can attach a wristlet. Either you can pre-buy one or crochet one yourself. I happen to have this one lying around. So I think you're going to have such a great time working on this project, and you may want to make one for yourself. You never know. So without further ado, let's get all of our materials together and let's get stitching. Okay guys, so here are the materials we need for our project. So what I used is a combination of Caron cotton cakes. I had some of this left over, and some of this Aunt Lydia's crochet thread, and it's the metallic kind, number 10, and it consists of 88% cotton, 12% metallic, okay? You don't have to use this combo, but I actually had some of this cotton cakes yarn left over from the crisscross cardigan. Some of you may remember working on that a few episodes ago. And I thought it would make for a great little clutch. And it's in this cream color, which kind of gives me, again, that vintagey feel. I'm kind of tending more towards that for some of the bridal accessories. And when I saw the metallic yarn at the craft store, I thought, what can I do with this? And I found that if I combined it with the cotton, it just kind of creates this really pretty vintagey feel. And there's a little bit of sparkle running through. I hope you can see that. And as you can see, I've balled it up because I've been experimenting with this design, and now we've finally got it settled. So this is what we're going to go through today. These are the two yarns that I'm using. This, I don't have the label for it anymore, but I'll pop up a graphic here on the screen so you can have a look at the fiber content. You don't have to use these particular yarns, but I would recommend something that will sit a little bit stiffer, for lack of a better word. It is going to be a bag, so we don't want something that's going to be too floppy. But as always, completely up to you, okay? So that's what I'm using for my yarn. And of course, I always have a pair of scissors and a darning needle on hand. And you want to make sure that it is appropriate for yarn, so it's got a nice big eye to sew in your ends. And you're going to need a crochet hook. Now, this metallic yarn is a super fine, I believe. Actually, it's a 0. So it's a lace type of yarn, or thread, actually. It's called crochet thread. There it is right there. Now, they're recommending a 1.5 millimeter hook. And I have decided, because I'm pairing this with the Caron, the cotton cakes, which is considered a medium 4. I would call this a thinner medium 4. I'm going to go ahead, and I have been using a 5 millimeter hook, also known as an H or a size 8. And I found that this hook was just the perfect size to kind of work the stitching with these two yarns together. So these are the materials, and we're ready to rock. You're also going to need an 8.5-inch zipper. Now at the store, they call this a 7-inch zipper. And I think it's because they actually measure it from where the closure is to the end here, where the two stops are. I counted it right from the full length for the opening of my bag. So just keep that in mind if you are going to be adding a zipper to your bag, which is what I recommend. Okay, so the main thing you want to keep in mind if you are following along exactly like what I'm doing, you want to treat these two types of yarns as one, okay? And I'll show you what I mean. So I've already unraveled a previous experimentation, but the idea is that you use these two yarns cohesively together. So you use them as one. So you see I just pair this really thin metallic thread with the yarn here. And I simply just treat them as if they are one strand, okay? So that's the thing you want to do. Now, I do want to let you guys know that this metallic yarn, when you're, see, I've already rolled it once, so I'm thinking it's going to relax a little bit. But when you are doing it straight from the spool here, the metallic just makes it twist and sit up a little bit. So you have to be careful that as you're working and you're pulling, that this doesn't get tangled up. And actually, see, this is a great example right here because I haven't, see, it naturally does that. So you just have to be really kind of aware and gentle not to pull too tightly because it will not, okay? All right, moving right along. Here is what we're gonna start with. We want to start with a slip knot. Okay. Once you have a slip knot on your hook, what we're going to do is we're going to do a series of chains. Now, I've made the length of my clutch just wide enough to be able to fit my particular cell phone in there. And this is why I wanted to create something kind of small and compact, especially for a bride on her day. Something small enough that she can carry her phone, lipstick, maybe a compact for touching up makeup throughout the day. So I definitely wanted to make the length wide enough to fit her phone in sideways. Now you can do it upright if you like, but it will all depend on the size of your phone. So if you've got the iPhone 11, for example, those models are just a little bit longer and wider than some of the Samsung phones. So just be aware that if the phone is the main thing that your bride is going to be carrying around, that you want to make sure that your bag at least fits that phone, okay? Wow, it's a different era. It's a different era for brides. Okay, so here we go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a chain of 25, okay? So I'm just going to yarn over. And you've heard me say this a lot, that first chain, you want to be careful that you do not chain too tightly because it will cause your work to bunch at the bottom, okay? And I'm going to do a chain of 25, so it's just a little bit snug right now. Okay, once you've done your chain of 25, your chain is going to look a little something like this. There we go. And so you can see that the crochet thread is running through that chain there, okay? And I tried to do it as even as I could. And then what I did is, just to make sure, I stretched it out and placed it over the particular phone that I have to make sure that it fit just nicely right across it lengthwise. A little bit snugly because this project will stretch a little bit. And as you can see here, that's exactly what I did. And it's a perfect fit for me. Okay, so moving along now, what we're going to do is we're going to chain an additional 1. And the reason why we're doing that is because we are now going to single crochet into the second chain from the hook. So this one is just going to become part of our single crochet because that's exactly what we're going to do. So in the second chain from the hook, we're going to insert the hook and we're going to place 1 double crochet into that stitch. And that is what we're going to do down the side of our chain till we get back to the very first stitch. So now you should be able to see why it was important to keep our chains nice and relaxed so that we can fit our hook nicely in there. And as I said before, the work tends to stretch a little bit, so that's why we wanted the length of our chain also to fit kind of snugly in the length. Okay, so that's what you're going to do all the way across, and you should still have 25 stitches at the end. And this is my very last single crochet. Always make sure to catch both of these yarns, right? And there is my first row, or actually half of my first round, because we're going to be working in the round, okay? So you can see how nicely that metallic thread runs through there. Now, I said you should have 25. If you start with 25, that's what you should have. I did, so I still have my 25 stitches. So you can see that chain 1 at the beginning just kind of helps round the bend there. Now what we're going to do is into this same stitch, the very last one we did, we're going to place 2 more single crochets in here. So we insert, that's the first single crochet, and we've got 1 more to place in there. Whoops. Just like that. So you can see by doing that, what it does is it comes around the bend there, and now we're ready to work along the bottom of that initial chain row. And so that's what we mean by we're going to be working in the round. So if you are new to this channel and you haven't heard about working in the round yet, welcome to doing it now. And what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and work right over this tail as I go. If it distracts you, you can just drop it and we can weave it in later. It's no big deal. Okay, so now what we're going to do is going back along the bottom, we're going to continue placing 1 single crochet into each initial chain stitch. So I'm just going to stretch that out there. So there you go. You should be able to see them right there. So you're working along the bottoms of these single crochets. So my next one is going to be right in there. And I'm just going to single crochet. And I'm going to try to hide my tail as I go. Just like that. Okay. And then again. So what you're going to do is just to make sure that everything is nice and even. If you're unsure, you're gonna have to count. I know many of you don't like counting. I know a lot of my, when I actually teach the crochet classes over at the church there, I know a lot of times I'm getting some people who knit already. And they always kind of grimace a little bit when I say you've got to count your stitches. And they say, well, with knitting, it's so great because, you know, you just know once you're at the end of your, you know, once all your loops are done, you're done. So it does take some getting used to if you're not one to like to count, but counting does help to make your work nice and uniform and smooth. So you really want to get into that habit of double checking your stitches. Okay, so why was I going on that long rant? Because what will happen is at the very end, so you can see it's coming up around the bend, and this is now the bottom of your bag, believe it or not. So at the end, what will happen is we started with 25 stitches. You're going to double that number. So that means you'll have 50. Plus we added an extra one in the side here, 51, and we're going to add 1 more in the side there, 52. And once we get there, I'm going to show you. But at the end of this first round, you should have, if you started with 25 like me, you should have 52 stitches at the end, okay? So for now, just keep doing your single crochets until you get back to the very beginning here. And then I will just take you through closing off our first round, okay? Okay, so I've just done my 50th stitch here. So this is that last chain. So I'm going to put 1 more single crochet that brings me to 51. And then we've got to add 1 extra one in here to cap off the end. Because remember, this first single crochet belongs to the top. This last one we did belongs to the bottom edge. So we always need to cap off each side with 1 more. So I'm going to put 1 more single crochet, and that gives us our 52 stitches. See that? So it just rounds it out nicely. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert my hook in the top of my very first stitch there, and I'm just going to slip stitch. This will join my first round. Okay, so I'm just going to pull that out so you guys can see. And your work is going to look something like this. Okay, so it looks like a little really skinny oval. So again, we had 25 stitches to start with, okay? And then we did an extra stitch on the side to come up around. Then we did 25 along the bottom and an extra stitch at the end to kind of cap off the sides. That is why we now will have 52 stitches in total if you started with your 25, okay? So that is round 1 complete. This is the bottom of our bag. So you can see that's the back of your work. So that's the base of our little clutch there. So we're now going to go on to round 2. So for round 2, we're now going to use the puff stitch. And for those of you that did or had a look at our bridal capelet in January, we used the what I call the mini puff stitch. And we've also had a swatch tutorial on how to do a version of the regular puff stitch. So there's many little nuances and variations to the puff stitch. So you can kind of adjust it as you like, but I'm going to use the puff stitch that I did similarly in that capelet. So we talked a little bit about at the earlier part of the year how I was really trying to show different types of stitches using flat projects as well as projects in the round so that you can get comfortable adjusting how to stitch it in different types of projects. So in this case, we are going to be using the puff stitch now in the round, okay? And I am just making a slight little adjustment because a traditional puff stitch usually needs a stitch count in multiples of 2. And as you notice, I did not give you a particular multiple because the adjustment we're going to make to this puff stitch is going to be very similar to how we did it in the capelet. Again, a little nuance of mine. So to begin, we are going to chain 2. Okay, and this is generally the height of the mini puff stitch that I want. Now, when I chain 2, I also made sure to stay fairly relaxed. So those chain 2s are quite stretched, okay? If you're a tight crocheter, I would recommend chaining 3, okay? So here's how we're going to work our mini puff stitch. You're going to yarn over and right back into where you slip stitched. You're going to insert your hook, which is right there for me. You're going to yarn over and you're going to pull up a loop. Okay, and you want to stretch it to the height of that chain 2. See that? Okay, and then I like to kind of place my finger here to secure that loop. Then I'm going to yarn over again, secure it, insert again back into that same space. I'm going to yarn over and pull up another loop and stretch it up to the height of that chain 2. So now I technically have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 loops on my hook. And remember that the metallic and the Caron cotton are working as one. Once I've got those loops on my hook, I'm then going to yarn over again and I'm going to pull through the first 4 loops only. This is what's a little different than the other 2 puff stitch tutorials we've done. Okay, so I've only pulled through the first 4. So now I have 2 loops on the hook. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to yarn over and pull through both of them. So hopefully you can see, my camera would focus, that when we pull through the first 4 only, and then we pull through the last 2, that it kind of secured that little puff in its own stitch. It just creates a little tighter shape at the top, like almost like a teardrop. And for this bag, I wanted to make sure that our puffs are a little bit on the skinny side, so to speak. So that's what it looks like right now. It might not look like much yet to you. We're going to do that again. So unlike the traditional puff stitch where you would skip a stitch and do it in the next one, we're going to go right into the very next stitch. And that's why I made these puff stitches a little thinner, so we don't have to worry about needing extra space. So in the next one, you're going to yarn over again, and you're going to go into the very next stitch, which is right there. You're going to pull up a loop, and again, I'm going to stretch it to the same height as the previous one. So now I've got one to work with. I'm going to yarn over. I'm going to insert back into that same stitch, pull up a loop. Okay, there are my 5 loops all together. I'm going to yarn over, pull through the first 4 only. See that? So it traps these loops together. And now when I resolve the stitch, see, when I pull through that first one, for example, it locks in the puff there. And then this one just solidifies it. So now we have 2 puff stitches next to each other. Now, as the name suggests, it puffs out. So your work will kind of stretch outward a wee bit. Normally we would do this pulling the yarn through bit 5 times in a traditional puff stitch, okay? And you may remember that from the previous tutorial. We are only doing it twice, okay? Let's do that again. So we're going to yarn over, find the very next stitch, insert, pull up a loop and stretch, yarn over, back into that same stitch, pull up another loop. I always kind of stretch it out to make sure it's nice and even. And then I'm going to yarn over, pull through all but 1. And then I yarn over and pull through 2 to resolve. Okay, so you can see now that it's starting to take shape a little bit. And that's all you're going to do for all of round 2. Okay, so you're going to go 1 into each stitch all the way around the bend. And you're going to continue around all these stitches here all the way until you come back to the very beginning. So go ahead and do that. Pause the video. What I will do is I will just meet up with you around here just to guide you through that bend there. If you're a little bit newer and feel a little bit nervous about kind of coming up around the bend there, I'm going to go over that with you. Okay, so for now, 1 little mini puff into each stitch to the end of this row. Okay, I'm coming up to my last one here just before I hit that bend. So I just work it like I've been working my mini puff. Pull through and pull through. And just to give you an idea, this is what your work should be looking like now. So now you can really see that pretty effect that the that metallic crochet thread has going through it, and the way the puff stitch really kind of just gives it that nice texture. The other reason why I loved using the puff stitch for this bag is the stitches really snuggle closely into each other, and it just gives a much more solid look. So I really love that. Okay, so the very next stitch is right here. It's going around the bend, so you're just going to continue working it as usual. What you are going to notice though, because we're not going to do any more increasing in the number of our stitches, is that your work is going to start to bow a little bit like a bowl. And that is totally normal. Okay, so I'm going to yarn over, pull through, and pull through 2. So you can already see that that's happening. See that? It's kind of curving up. That's actually what we want to have happen to create our bag. Okay, so I'm going to continue on to the next one, which is right here. I'm going to yarn over, insert, and stretch it up, and back into that same stitch, pull through 2, and then, pull through the first 4 and then pull through 2. So you can see now, if I look at the bottom, woo, you can see that it's curving around and it's bowing upward. Perfecto, that's exactly what we want. I'm going to do one more with you just to kind of get you around this corner here. So we're at the very next one here. You're going to pull up, and I always try to kind of push that out because we are going to be working with the right side facing towards us. And then yarn over, insert, pull through, first 4, and the next 2. So there you go. Look at that. It's just curving up really beautifully there. Okay, and now once you get around that corner, the rest should be really straightforward, and you will do the same thing. And we don't need to do any extras in the sides like we did in round 1. So you're just going to come up. I'm going to meet you up in the very last stitch, and then I'm just going to guide you through closing our round 2. Just love that. Okay, guys, you're off to the races. I'll meet you at the end of this round. Okay, so if I do this, guys, this is the bottom of our bag. See that? How it went around the corner? That's just lovely. So love that. Okay, so I'm at my last stitch here. And in reality, this is actually the first stitch. So if I just pull my work apart there, remember that chain 2 we did at the beginning? This is coming out of this stitch. So normally this is what we call a false stitch. We would not work into it because we've already got the chain 2. But in this project, we are not going to count the chain 2 as anything. So we're going to work our last puff stitch into that same stitch there where we share the chain 2. So the last puff will go right in there. Okay. And then pull through 2. Okay, and now we're ready to close off our round 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to completely ignore the chain 2, and at the top of the very first puff, the actual stitch that belongs to it, which is right there, we're just going to insert our hook and slip stitch to join the round. Just like that. See? And it's going to bunch, and then you just do this. Boop. Okay? It's going to pull that out. So now, hopefully you can see what I mean by it takes on a bit of a bowl type shape, so it's curving up. That is exactly what we want. So this is essentially the bottom of our clutch, our little mini clutch, and so it's going to look like this. So this is the base of our little bag here. Isn't that nice? Just love how that sparkle runs through there. Okay, so basically our bag now for a while is going to consist of this repeat. So we're just going to go back and repeat row 1, row 2, row 1, row 2. What's row 1? Row 1 is just simply doing 1 single crochet into each stitch all the way around. I say row 1, but it's not really row 1 only because in row 1 we increased a stitch. So if that confuses you, just know that in row 1, it's simply going to consist of 1 single crochet into each stitch all the way around. So here we go. So this is how we're going to work the pattern. So we've got the base here with single crochets at the very bottom, and then the next row was puff stitches. We are now going to repeat a row of single crochets and a round of puff stitches. We're working in rounds, sorry. And there are no increases anymore. So this should be super easy to work. So we're going to chain 1 and then right back into where we slip stitched, we're going to single crochet. But here's the thing that's a little bit adjusted. Instead of going into the typical space of the stitch, we're going to go down in between and underneath. Okay, so in between the puff stitches, we're going to insert to pull up a loop. So our single crochets will look just a little bit elongated. So I'm going to do that again. So instead of going into the traditional stitch there, we're just going to dip underneath the stitch, which is going to be in between your puff stitches there. And I'm just inserting to pull up that loop and work the single crochet. Okay, just like that. So what I really like about doing it this way is all the stitches are now nestling into each other. I'm going to do that a couple more times because it can be a little confusing, I think. So see where your V's are? Traditionally, you would work into the stitch, which is just making sure the V's are kind of facing up. Okay, but see, normally we'd go in this way. So what I'm saying is we're going to go in that way under the whole stitch. So you could say technically that we are working into the row below. Whatever makes sense to you, that's exactly how I would like you to work it. Okay, so again, I just go into the next one, and don't be afraid to kind of just pull them apart a little bit and see where you're placing your hook. Okay, so again, the next one, and you do want to be careful if some of the strands are looser, you don't want to be pulling them up. That's the only thing about working with 2 yarns together. You want to keep them as uniform as possible in their consistency. So I've done a couple there. So there we go. So here are the puff stitches and here are the single crochet rows. Okay. And that's all you're going to do all the way around. So this is a repeat of round 1. And what we're going to do is you're going to repeat. You're going to do round 1, then go back to round 2, the puff stitch round. Round 1, round 2, round 1, round 2. Okay, so I am going to now repeat this pattern 3 more times. So what will happen is I will have a repetition of a single crochet round and a puff stitch round 4 times in total. Okay, so I'm going to finish off this round here. I will meet back up with you here just to kind of remind you how to start that puff again, and then I'll set you loose. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to meet back up with you after that once I've finished my repeat 4 times. Remember, this first one does count as 1. All right, so go ahead and finish your single crochet round, and I'll meet back up with you here in a few minutes just to guide you through closing it off and restarting your puff again. Okay, and I'm just coming up to my last couple of single crochets, and I do want to say that during my single crochet round I did crochet slightly tighter, and the reason why is because I do want to kind of cinch in a wee bit these puff stitches. Okay, so you have something that looks like that. So when you put your work down, see, the puffs naturally make it want to bow out because they're squished in together. That is another reason why I'm using mini puffs as opposed to the traditional puff stitches, because they're much thicker and they would make the bag go right out. So when I did my single crochets, I just made them just a wee bit tighter when I stitched them up. Okay, and so I'm just coming up to my last, I think it is my last. It is. Now, remember, this is a false stitch here, so we're never counting any of the chain 1s or the chain 2s. I'm going to insert my hook right in there. Sorry. I'm going to go in between there. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to single crochet. And I'm going to slip stitch to the very top of that first stitch there, just to close off my round like that. Okay. So now you can see that it's really starting, see, it can sit on its own. So now we're working the bag upward. Isn't that cute? I think it's cute anyway. Okay, so now we're just simply going to do the repeat again of the puff stitches. So we're in our second round or second repeat. So when you do the puff stitch round, you always begin with a chain 2, a relaxed chain 2, as you can see. Okay, so I'm not doing it too tightly. And now I'm going to yarn over and right back into that same stitch I slip stitched into. I'm going to pull up a loop, stretch it, yarn over, insert and pull up one more loop. So you have 5 loops in total. You're going to yarn over, pull through the first 4, and then yarn over and pull through the last 2. Okay, and I always want to stretch out my crochet thread so it doesn't get tangled. So that's our first puff stitch, but now we're going to go back into working the regular stitches. So this is why we did a row of single crochets, just to kind of have something nicely to sit into. So now we're going to yarn over and just go right into the very next stitch, which is right there, and work our mini puff. Maybe I should call it the skinny puff instead of the mini puff. People tend to think it just means it's a shorter stitch, but it is not. It is actually just a thinner stitch. I just love how that comes out with the crochet thread in there. It's just so pretty. Do that one more time. Insert, pull up, yarn over, insert, pull up. And you can see actually I stitched that stitch a bit too loosely. For my taste, I would have done it tighter next time around. 2 and 1. Okay, so the puffs are going to be looser stitches. The single crochets, I would say, stitch them a little bit more snugly. And that is it. Okay, so now you can really see how the puff, the single crochet, and the puff stitches creating this lovely design. All right, guys, I feel good enough to set you loose on your own. Do the number of repeats that you need. I'm going to do a total of 4, and I'm going to meet up with you when I have done that, and we'll talk about just finishing the top edge of our bag. We're almost there. Okay, so I have finished my 4 repeats. So my bag looks like this, and I'm just loving it. And then I actually got a little overexcited, and I continued on into the next section, which is just simply, we're going to do several rows of single crochets to create the top edging of our bag. So just to recap here, let me just take this out. So for my particular bag, I did the pattern repeat for 4 times. That means single crochet row, puff stitch, single puff, single puff, single puff. That is the end of the repeat. I then have proceeded to do 3 rows of single crochets. In total, I'm going to do 6 rows to end off my bag. And I'm just going to put a little graphic up here to show you what it will look like with the 6 rows done. And I really love how this pattern's coming out. The texture of the puffs and then the really kind of simplicity of the single crochets looks absolutely lovely. However, the reason why I'm kind of stepping back a little bit here, and I'm just going to pull these out. So I've done 1, 2, yeah. So I'm going to go down to 2 rows. And I'm going to show you how I'm going to add an extra embellishment to my bag, and this is completely optional. You guys can go ahead and just continue on with single crochets, and you slip stitch at the end of each row, or each round, I should say. So this is, hopefully you can see that there, that's where I slip stitched. So after I did my 4 pattern repeat, I have now done 2 rows of single crochets. So as we've done before, I did the single crochets in the spaces between the puffs. And then the next row, I just single crocheted 1 into each stitch. Okay. But I'm going to add a little bit of beading embellishment. And I'm doing that with this really cool necklace that I had lying around. Now, the thing with this necklace is it is broken. So this is another great example of how to reuse and recycle things that maybe don't work in their traditional fashion. So this is a great little necklace. It's got these little baubles here, and this one actually has, the clasp has broken on this, which actually will work perfectly for an embellishment as well as a zipper closure on this bag. So it couldn't have worked out better if I tried. So what I'm going to do is, as I continue now and finish the other 4 rows of single crochets, I'm going to embed this chain from the necklace into the bag, and it's just going to create this extra little bit of sparkle and beading to my evening bag. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that.